Clean they like riding, but I know that they ain't. Ride or die. I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint. Ride or die.
See if whether or not he said that pies don't come into existence. Because I think that would be a silly claim for anyone to make.
I said that concrete material does not poof into existence. We all agree on this. I said that
But
abstract labels and concepts do come into existence
but
because they are
but
based on mind.
pies aren't poofed into existence.
Well, I will say that I have been on Clubhouse for a little over 18 months now, almost 19 months, and never, ever before have I been in a room where there's been a discussion, a disagreement, a debate, or an argument about pie. And I specifically referenced cherry and apple. I thought you guys were referring to like 3.33333, the mathematical
That's
equation.
what I thought.
But you guys are actually talking about apple and cherry pie. So I'm gonna go on mute and listen to you guys discuss pie.
Well,
Yeah,
I try to throw pizza pie into the discussion in the chat when this was going on, Steve.
So, Steve, I can kind of give you a little bit of background. So, the original conversation was about the Kalam argument. And the claim that I was making, which was also made by several other people, is that when you say that everything that begins to exist has a cause, and you ask people to agree with you, when they come up with examples of things that begin to exist, every example that they put forward is actually just a recomposition or it's an abstract concept. There is no example of a concrete object beginning to
so
exist.
no, there's one thing I want to challenge with that recomposition thing
Sure.
is you guys are actually oversimplifying the process. Like, um, cells give rise to new cells. That material is consumed, and the thing is a new thing. The material does, in a sense, exist always, but not in that room. Like, science will tell you that every 7 years, you're pretty much like a new person. Your body's recycled out all the old material, and it's newer material. So I mean, I don't know why that's a hill you want to die on.
Well, that newer material you're referring to, is that atoms that did not exist
Is
previously?
that the same you, Null?
So this is what I'm talking about.
I'm
There's a
asking you a
distinction.
question, Null.
I
I
know,
mean,
I'm answering.
I know
This
you
is
don't want to dodge it. I know you want to
I'm not,
dodge it.
let me talk. So this is a distinction that needs to be made. When you talk about I, null, you, these are abstract labels that we give to things. Those things begin to exist because they require a mind. But the material that makes up my body, that all existed prior to I being me. We're all made of star stuff. I'm just a recomposition of star stuff.
You're
So
not an exact recomprehension of star stuff. You know that, right? Like, I can pile star stuff right here in front, like that dust and particles, and it's not going to make you. There's a very long process to create you.
I agree. But do you think that any atom in your body today did not exist prior to your body being formed?
Do you believe that you were created from
Are you?
stardust? Yes or no?
Yes, absolutely.
So then, in this causal thing, instead of saying first cause, just say created. Christians say that you were created by a creator. We can see that everything that begins to exist has a creator. You've actually given more than what typical people want to give on the Kalam.
Well, if you want to claim that beginning to exist is equivalent to a recomposition of pre-existing matter, then you would have to also be asserting that the universe beginning to exist means that the universe was recomposed of pre-existing matter. Are you saying that?
I think you're contradicting yourself because you said that you are just an abstract concept, meaning not material. But then you said that you are stardust and stardust is material. So what the fuck, sir?
Okay, the word you, put that in quotation marks. You is referring to an abstract
You
label
just said you
as
are
it was.
stardust. Is stardust an abstract label?
My body is
Nope.
composed of stardust. This particular configuration of stardust You are calling it you.
Are
It's an
you
abstract
Stardust,
label.
sir?
I am composed of stardust.
Yeah, it sounds like a contradiction.
I have a question. Do you believe that energy is eternal?
You roboted out. I didn't hear your
John, you
question.
faded out.
I was.
Repeat the question.
Do you believe that energy is eternal?
I believe that energy and matter does not appear to be created or destroyed. First law of thermodynamics.
Well, that's in an isolated system, a closed system like our natural universe.
hmm Yeah, so as far as we know, energy and matter cannot be created or destroyed. They're just two
So
forms that seem to be
matter
eternal.
existed for an infinite amount of time?
Matter has existed for all time,
Okay, so if an
or
God,
some time.
infinite amount of time had to go by before you matter rearranged to make you, then how the fuck would you ever be made if infinity had to go by first?
So this is a common problem. So you're attempting to count backwards to infinity. That's not how infinity works. Uh, if you want to claim that time has an infinite past, then you're just saying that time has always existed for all time.
Yeah, so an infinite amount of time had to go by before you existed, right?
Do you actually believe time existed before the Big Bang?
Godless, I
Uh,
think you should stick with him on the fact that he conceded that he was created, and that's way worse than
Oh
cause.
yeah, created implies a
That's just
mind. Are you not an atheist, sir?
yeah.
oh, I'm definitely an atheist.
Well,
So
created
when he
implies that there has to be some intention.
Uh, I don't believe that.
Created means like there's some kind of purpose, intention. Yeah, let's Google the
Uh,
word create. Hang on. Let me
yeah,
look it
that's
up
what
on
the word
Google.
implies.
Okay, so
That's the
when a
entailment of
tree
Create means
create.
to bring force.
when a tree creates an apple, the tree intended to create the apple?
A tree
So,
produces
the
an
first
apple.
thing that comes up on Google is to cause something to happen as a result of one's actions. One's meaning like an agent.
Well, answer
Right.
this. When a tree creates an apple, did the tree intend to
Now,
create
now
the
you're
apple?
equivocating. A tree produces an apple.
Yeah, a tree doesn't create an apple.
When I say that I am made up of star stuff, it means that I was produced out of star stuff.
What does that have to do? That's just a red herring. What does that have to do with you using the word create?
I'm just telling you what I meant by the word create.
Oh, so you're saying you misspoke when you used the word create?
I'm saying I didn't have a dictionary up in front of me when I used the word.
Maybe it was some kind of Freudian slip because you know God exists.
So, so if the first premise is saying everything that begins to exist has a cause, and they're including the universe as one of those things, why would we accept the premise? We would just reject it on the basis that we can't say everything that begins has a cause if the universe is part of that set of everything, because we have no reason to think that's true of the universe, or at
Well,
least
do you
we
think?
want a justification for it, right?
Yeah,
well you
and
would have
Haiti,
to
there could be a. You could be
explain
right,
why.
Haiti. Oh, go ahead, James.
I'll be real quick. You have to explain though why you see that everything else observable has a cause, but now you're wanting to, and this is what they kind of call a taxi cab fallacy, because you're arriving at the conclusion everything else, but then when it comes to the universe, you hop off. Now you have to give like a metaphysical explanation why this one thing is devoid of the same cause that we observe
Yeah,
from everything else.
yeah, because we can use induction to determine everything except the universe
How?
that begins to exist has a
I mean,
cause.
that's an
But we
assumption,
cannot use
but
induction.
no, I mean,
No, but
how can you
we
do
don't
that,
know how
right?
universes, because we have no observation. We can't observe a universe. We can observe everything inside a universe, or we can observe enough to make an inductive, choice.
No,
But we have
that's
never
not
observed how universes.
that
Yes,
doesn't
sir.
matter. Not from the
Yeah,
argument.
universe is part of the class of
I
things.
understand that.
That's what's being argued
I
for.
understand that, and I'm now
We're not
saying,
going from. We're
based on
saying
that, I reject the premise. Yeah, I understand.
everything that begins to exist has a
I
cause.
accept that now.
We're acquainted with all of these. We're acquainted with all of these different things, right? The universe is a subset within that class. Therefore, there's no
Well,
difference.
I think there is a difference because we're not acquainted with how universes work. We're not acquainted with anything about universes. So we can't use induction. Or if we can, it's really, as Danny said, it's really poor enough or weak enough to simply reject the premise. I have to drive.
No, I'm just agreeing with Danny that it's a much more generalized principle. It's not talking about parts or anything of that nature.
Just think what you said. Because earlier I said I kind of
So is the argument really like the universe is not a thing under the subclass of things? Is that really the objection?
no, I wasn't saying I was acknowledging that there's a set of all material objects, and we can inductively extrapolate from some members to other members. I think the discomfort is that it might be the case that there's one member of that set that has that relation to all the other members, that it's like the whole of all, it's like the that in other words all members but one of will be like some kind of have a part, like a part whole relation with one of the members of that set. And I think that makes people anxious. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just failing to see there, Danny, why and how anybody can take the universe and apply it to its own special separate category from all observable things, and then say just because we can't observe this means that somehow we should assume that it doesn't follow all other observations of things. That just doesn't make sense. Like, I think it's a bad argument. I think that now you could say in the grand scheme you have to use fallibilistic knowledge on it, but still
Yeah.
being a fallibilist would say that yes, the universe has a cause.
Now, but to play devil's advocate, one might be able to say, well, is not God under the subclass of things?
No, he's not, because it's whatever begins to exist. You're not saying that God began to
Oh,
exist.
okay.
So that's the whole point.
So
It's whatever. It's whatever anything that begins to exist that has a cause, right? So that when the class are things itself. It's not
Okay, so
even
the
what Danny
class is
was
not
saying
just
about
things, but things that begin to
physical.
exist.
Yeah, but that's how it's stated from the
Okay,
beginning.
I
The
got it.
point is, it's not even what Danny was saying about physical or material or this part or no. It's the most general category possible.
Now I see why you can't include God there, because uh, we don't understand God as beginning to exist.
plus, just to be fair, we don't need to play devil's advocate much on the stage now because Danny's here and Danny knows his position fairly well. So I don't
And
think
James
that
is
he
mod,
necessarily needs
so
us to step in.
if he yeah, James is mod, so if you get out of hand, John, then he'll drop your ass quick.
What I said, James could do whatever he wants.
Well, it's just so I'm just saying is that like Danny is very, very capable of making an inference or an argument or a response. I don't mind like steel manning someone's position, but I just don't know that Danny needs us to try to
Well, no, I
help
wasn't
steel
really
man
trying to help
his
Danny out.
position at this particular juncture.
I was actually thinking
It seemed
about
like
it
John was just
myself.
asking a question. Yeah, you were just basically.
Because the situation was, well,
Yeah, I was
universe.
just joking with
Is it me? But yeah, I mean, just when the there seemed to be a hesitancy to include universe in that subclass of things, and it just Danny was talking about, well, physical objects, and he kind of took God out of there, and then I said, wait, I thought to myself, wait a minute, why can't you
I
just, and then but I see it's not
yeah.
just
I
things
was
or
just
physical.
joking with you, John.
Yeah,
I was
it's
just
it's things
busting
that
your
begin
chops.
to
so to
exist.
answer your question, John, I think that it's a knee-jerk reaction because somehow, some reason, some. Go ahead, Julie Jeannie. that somehow some atheists believe, not all, but some believe that if they concede that the universe has a cause or an explanation, then somehow they've just conceded that God exists. But that's far from the case. Like, the
Oh
Kalam
yeah.
does not demonstrate God's existence. It's just like the first chain in a much longer series of arguments. But I think that's why people get hung up on that.
No, I think it's even more modest than that. All they need to, in this instance, all we're looking at is whether or not uh, the first premise is in any way guilty of fallacy of composition, right? So nothing even you could reject the argument based on um, disagreeing with it in some other fashion. So even the argument itself doesn't really turn on that, right?
Yeah,
So it's
is
much more
somebody
modest.
is somebody arguing that the first premise of the Kalam commits the fallacy of composition?
Yes,
Because I fail to see how it does personally.
it doesn't.
But I'm willing. Yeah, I don't think it does either, despite the fact that I have objections to it. I wouldn't. The fallacy of composition isn't one. I was just gonna say I would be interested in hearing what the whoever was it Danny? Does Danny? I would be if it's him. I
No,
would
no,
be
no.
interested in hearing.
Danny's not.
Oh,
Danny's not arguing that. He's
okay.
just kind of
Sully is
talking
one of
about
them.
it.
I was gonna say I would
No,
be
no, I don't
interested.
even think Sully was necessarily arguing it. I don't know. I mean, maybe he can
Well, J Mike
come
for
back
sure
and
was.
clarify. But yeah, let me just explain what the genesis of the conversation was. James, maybe you can post a link to the video. It was just something that J Mike had said previously, and he sort of doubled down on it even after the discussion that's mentioned in the video. And it was brought up today by Matt Adams, and I went on stage to say that Matt was right, that J Mike is wrong, and it's not a fallacy of composition. So that's how the context of the discussion. So you would have to
Okay.
watch it, Leo, to see
Yeah,
exactly what he said.
I was just gonna say I thought it might have been somebody on the stage that was arguing that it
No,
commits that fallacy. I was just gonna
no.
say I'd be interested then in hearing what the argument because as I understand it, um, the Kalam cosmological argument isn't going to conclude that the universe has a cause in virtue of things like contained within it having causes, but it's going to be an appeal to the causal principle. I think that Jake has already touched on this, and the causal principle is going to be much more broad than like the sort of individual, like token applications of that principle. So it's not going to be that the universe has a cause because everything in it does. It's going to be that everything in the universe and the universe all have causes because of a broader metaphysical principle.
I don't think it's that difficult. Uh, when someone like Craig or others talk about the Kalam or they're making an argument and they'll say that, well, everything that begins to exist has a cause. To me, that's worded a little funny. Everything that begins to exist, I look at it as everything that exists had a beginning.
Well, can you give an example of a concrete object that began to
I just
exist?
explained it earlier. I mean, I don't know how long you've been here, but I don't
He
want to
didn't.
I don't want to go through it again.
I mean, is the
Um,
discussion the
Well,
Kalam argument itself, or is it the composition fallacy?
No, he's just asking, um, when you mean begins to exist, he's saying you're obviously not meaning it poofed into existence, but that there's a causal relationship. So he's asking for explanation what we mean by that. And I would say that you would have to concede that like previous material was used to generate this material that is me, that was used to generate the material that's my trees outside or my kids, like these things. So yes, I believe that God is um, repurposing material that he created. But so that's something that's just go ahead and answer that question. There's no point in like I think arguing against them on that. Now it's just then if they concede that if the universe is made out of material and the universe was not always as it is now, then you could say the universe has a cause. And I think that it's so much easier to just for atheists to say universe has a cause or an explanation, and just move on to the next part because I think the contingency arguments and what that first cause would be and the necessity out of that would be is a much more fruitful conversation.
Well, for
But
Craig, that's a
the
part
theist,
of the Kalam cosmological argument. The conceptual analysis of what it would mean to be a cause of the universe, at least for Craig, is going to be a part of his Kalam cosmological argument or his defense of it.
and the theist is not arguing that the universe was recomposed of pre-existing stuff.
Yeah, it was
They're arguing that
creatio
God,
ex nihilo.
yeah, exactly, from nothing. And so they're combining two premises together that aren't actually related.
No, they're not saying from nothing. Why would you say that a theist is
Well,
saying from
Craig
nothing?
says that at least. I don't know if anybody in
I
here
don't know that
does, but
Craig. I don't know that Craig is using nothing in the sense that I think you're trying to imply it now.
like literal nothingness, philosophical nothingness. Yes, Craig thinks God brought the universe into existence ex nihilo. He believes it was a creatio ex nihilo event. He said this extensively in the literature he's written on this.
Well, I think what he means by the nothing, he doesn't believe that absolutely
It's
nothing
a
creates something.
philosophical nothingness, yes.
Hang on. Let
There
me
is
finish my.
not anything that God
Let
created the
me
universe from.
finish my sentence. God bless it. You people and your interruptions. What I believe that he is stating is not that it came from nothing, but that the nothing is God and that this universe proceeded from God. God is something. But he's not saying that there was any preconditioned material that God interacted with.
Yeah, Leo,
Well,
a
well, of
philosophical
course not.
nothing
Well, of
is
course
the
not. He thinks that God created the universe from nothing. So of course he doesn't think there was some
no,
sort of
a
material.
philosophical.
What Craig means when he says that that God created the universe from nothing isn't that there was a thing there and that thing is nothing and God used that thing that is nothing to create the universe. What he means is that God didn't create the universe from anything. God created the universe not from anything at all. It was merely an act of God's will. There was not anything from which the universe was created. It was creatio ex nihilo. This is extensive in his literature. I don't know how you
Okay,
could
so
deny this.
listen. Here's the thing.
A
Look,
Yeah,
wait.
no, it's a very
I'm
simple. All Craig's saying is that there's no material cause, right? So there's an efficient cause. There's no material
Yes.
cause. This is what Craig is saying.
That doesn't mean
But then in
nothing,
terms of
though.
the
That
theist,
Yeah,
doesn't.
just real quick.
Nothing is philosophical. Nothing is the absence of everything. So if God existed, then it's not the case that the universe came
Yeah,
from
but God
nothing.
didn't create the universe from himself. The
His
universe was
yeah, he
created
it
did.
came
as
from his
well,
it came
No,
from
he
his
did.
not in
desire to
Craig's
create it.
view.
The
Not
universe
in
came from
Craig's
his
view.
will.
That is not
From
Craig's
his
view, at
will
least.
and his words and his breath.
Yes, but God wasn't the thing from which the universe was made. That's not so. So it was a creatio ex nihilo. This is what Craig says. Yes,
Craig would
there
But
is
what
an
do
say
you
it came
mean?
efficient
from
cause,
God's
and
will.
there is no material cause.
Craig would say it came from God's will.
Yes, it was an act of God's will from which the universe was brought into
It was.
existence.
It was.
So
He's
God's
just
will is
denying.
But
something.
there wasn't
no, no, no.
something that God acted on from which the universe was
Yeah,
constructed.
Here, would you
he's
say that
just
the universe?
denying.
It was a pure act of will.
Would
That's
you
what
say?
Yeah,
Craig
and
takes
he's
to
just.
mean.
Would
That's what
would
Craig's
Craig
you
just.
takes creatio ex nihilo to mean here.
Yes,
would
So
you
yes, and
say
he's
that?
just denying that God's will is material. Big deal.
Well, would you say that the universe is composed of God's will?
well, no, I would not know. I'm not a theist. I'm just
No, I'm asking
explicating
the
what.
theist.
Oh,
I'm
my bad.
asking that.
Sorry.
Yeah. Would you say
Yeah,
that the
sorry.
universe is composed of God's will?
So look, I'm honestly, I'm just gonna say this and go down because I'm not here for this discussion. It was just the composition thing. But then the person who said that you're using to like that maybe you were implying that there was an equivocation or something because you're saying it has a cause, and then the kind of cause or creation that someone like Craig is referring to isn't really a cause. That's not really true because I mean the argument doesn't say everything that begins to exist has a material cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a material cause, or that it was created ex nihilo. So it's if you're going to say that God's creation of the universe without his acting upon prior matter is not a cause, well, that would be an argument of its own. But then if you're not saying that, then there's nothing really wrong with the argument in terms of validity, if creation ex materia and creation ex nihilo are both forms of causation. So anyway, I was just here to discuss that whole part to whole composition fallacy versus inductive generalization thing. So thanks, guys. Yeah, take care.
So the point I was making is that in premise one, everything that begins to exist, well, we don't have any examples of that. We only have examples of things being recomposed. So then if you combine that with the universe began to exist, does that mean the universe was composed? I don't think that's what the theist means
No,
here.
but you would be
And so that's
fighting.
why the argument doesn't work.
No, you'd be fighting
Well,
He's
over
just
but
using.
equivocating on what it means to begin. That's
Hold
just
on, hold on.
equivocation.
well, no, because what the response is going to be is that, I mean, sure, it might be the case that there's recombination of physical material, but it's that's just in the case of material causation. But when it comes to the universe, that's not material causation. And then
If
someone
you
Well,
like
guys,
Craig would say that, to say that, oh well, there really isn't any causation. Things don't really begin to exist. It's just a recomposition or some sort of transposition of pre-existing material. What Craig would say is that that just seems to commit somebody to mereological nihilism, and he's going to say that one ought not be committed to mereological nihilism.
so what I'm going to point out is that even if you guys want to switch it to explanation, we could say that everything that begins to exist has an explanation, or everything that's recomposited has an explanation. If the universe has not always existed in its current, which we know from the Big Bang, the point of the singularity, that the universe was not as it is today, which means that the universe has been um, either changed from its original state or
Evolved.
progressed into another state. But you would have to
Evolved.
say that that still works within the causal or explanation relationship. That's why, like this, the first cause argument is just it's like such a silly hill, I think, for people to die arguing against, because the first cause doesn't automatically demonstrate that a God exists. It doesn't, you know, it's not like a super slam dunk for a theist, because then I've still got to get into contingency and why I think that that beginning has to have a will. Like, there's a lot of things you have to get into.
Well, I think here is probably where the discussion would just end up getting into like what you mean by cause, like what model of causation you're working with.
I think it's more about what existence is, what's meant by existing, what's meant by everything, as opposed to universe. There's a lot of confusion.
What's meant by what?
Yeah, the word begin
Exist,
is really what
exist,
begin is what
begin.
throws things off, because if you talk about begin as in prior to beginning there was nothing and then there was something, well, that's what I think the theist is referring to when they say God made the universe begin. But we don't actually have any examples of things beginning to exist in that way. We only have recomposition.
Well, no, I created a cup of coffee. It's composed of beans and water. It began to exist.
The beans and water
But that's a
began
very
to exist.
simplistic. No, the cup of coffee, like I said.
Well, that's just a
I
recomposition of
created,
beans and water.
but I created a cup of coffee, which
What do
began
you
to
mean by
exist
created?
when I composed it, when I took the items of beans and water. So I mean, it's a very old and not very thought out argument. I mean, obviously, you're uh, you're calling attention to the things that uh, the creation are made up of, but that's not what it's speaking to. Clearly,
Well, yeah, it's speaking to creatio ex nihilo, which I agree here. I think the point that Null is trying to make is that the concept of creatio ex
no,
nihilo seems
the Kalam
almost
is not doing
incoherent.
that.
That well, I didn't say that it was but is that the
We're not talking
concept of
about.
create
We're not
is that the
talking about
concept
ex nihilo.
is that the concept of creatio ex nihilo is going to be incoherent? That's we've never observed. Like, what does it mean? What does this notion of begins to exist? What does it mean to say that something's existence begins? What does that look like? Because when you make a cup of coffee, nothing is beginning. There isn't something that was not existing that is now.
Or
Everything
did
you're
the cup of
using was
coffee exist
already
before I made
there.
it?
What do you? It depends on what you mean by that particularly. I mean, there is some
You're
sense in which the
confused?
cup. There is some
Well,
sense in which
he,
the cup of coffee was extant through the space time reality, but you may not have been
Oh my
co-extended
goodness.
alongside particular instances of that cup of coffee.
Yeah,
Yes,
JJ.
because I'm a tense anti-realist. And then that's another thing that you get with the particularly the first premise of the Kalam is the the difference between tense realism and tense anti-realism with respect to time.
Right. The Eiffel Tower always existed. How many Eiffel
Well,
Towers
no,
exist?
always is the wrong word because always is a tense.
Oh, snap.
Always is a tensed term. So somebody who holds to a tense-less view isn't going to say that the Eiffel Tower always exists. Just
Did it
that
did,
the
did it
Eiffel
begin?
Tower, just that the Eiffel Tower exists. There might be
Did it
instances where humans were not co-extended in the same spatio-temporal points with the Eiffel Tower, but that doesn't mean that the Eiffel Tower isn't in space-time somewhere.
is
Yeah, but you're just
begin
talking
So
about B
a
theory
tense
at
Leo,
this
term?
point,
Leo,
Leo.
let me ask you a question. What if you're anything other than a reductive materialist or reductive physicalist about the mind, and consciousness is seen as something that's like an emergent property or something? Um, would consciousness have began to exist?
Well, it depends what you mean by begins to exist.
Oh, snap.
Existing after having not existed.
Well, I would say no. I would say that there's obviously always going to be some place in the space-time continuum where consciousness is extended.
What do you mean? I mean, like, okay, so assume consciousness is like causally downstream, emergent, and it hasn't
So
always been the case that there
imagine
are.
imagine if I had a piece of paper, just your standard piece of paper that you had in school, and I draw a line right in the middle of it that's an inch long. But I go to one of the corners of the paper and I put my finger there and I say, "Is there a line?" What are you going to answer? Yes, or are you going to answer no? I mean, there is a line on the paper. There isn't a line where I'm pointing to on the paper, but there's a line somewhere on the paper. So the
Are
question,
you?
is there
Are
a
you?
line,
Okay, okay.
isn't going to be entirely meaningful.
So right now you're relying on some kind of like a B theoretic view of time, and you're
Yes, I'm a
saying that
tense
Yeah, B
no,
theory.
yeah,
anti-realist.
okay. So putting that aside, right? So assuming that we're saying that something that begins to exist is something that exists at that has a first moment of existence, before which, regardless of your metaphysic of time, before which it did not exist. Okay, so it exists at certain points of time, and prior to that, it did not exist. So assume you have this emergent view of consciousness. Would consciousness have began to exist?
Well, it's just a malformed question for somebody like me because I don't. This question of before is just a relative, so it's going to be before to some people, but it's not going to be before to others. So I don't. There is no one unified answer to that question.
Yeah,
Well, I
but
think
keep in
it's
mind the guys here who are bringing up the whole uh, view that everything is just a recombination of prior stuff are sort of looking at it in this like simplistic way that kind of it like doesn't really take all that
Emergence.
metaphysical baggage into consideration, right? So I'm just saying on that commonsensical view of things beginning to exist or not beginning to exist, them being rearrangements or not being rearrangements. Just on that question, um, you would say that given that just very basic view that you guys were putting forward, this emergent phenomenon, whether it's of consciousness or something else, would count as something that is an exception to that rule of recombination, right?
Oh,
Well,
I
I
don't.
think
I
I would make
don't
the
think
case.
consciousness is no. I think consciousness is a combination of particular physical aspects, structures, and
No,
You
yeah,
think
but
it's
you're not
systems.
emergent?
listening to me. I said
Yes, I do think it is emergent.
I
You think
started
it's emergent?
Yes.
So it begins?
No, begins isn't the language I would use.
Is
yeah.
emergent?
So the
Is that
point
is
is
that a
that begins
temporal
isn't a
term?
language you would use
Is emergence a
with
temporal
anything.
term?
So
No.
but what's the
Oh,
Yeah,
point of
but
snap.
you
Leo, we're
criticizing?
not debating B theory right now, right?
That's
Exactly,
fine. I was
We're
just
not.
answering questions.
because Leo, begins seemed to be a perfectly intelligible word that you were denying. No, you were denying something beginning to exist, but the word beginning seemed to be perfectly intelligible until this example came up. Is my concern. So
I don't
right
think
now,
so. I think, in fact, two people here brought up that they're a little bit confused on what means. I mean, Noel can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think both of us are confused still as
Yeah,
to
but
what begins to
it wasn't
exist
from your
means.
standpoint though, Leo. It wasn't from
Well,
the
I
standpoint of
expressed on
assuming B
actually a
theory.
couple of equations that I agreed with the question that Noel was raising.
So I would make
Yeah,
the
but it
case
wasn't
that
on the basis of B theory. That's the point. It was
Well,
based
that's
on,
fine, but all I pointed out is that that is going to be something that factors into this discussion, as we
of
have
course,
seen.
yeah, but that's
So,
well
like,
known.
trying to avoid that discussion isn't going to help. Like,
No,
if
but
it's
we're
going to
not
be
trying to avoid that,
integral
dude.
to the discussion.
so
That's we're not trying to avoid that. But Craig himself admits that the argument is basically run assuming A theory. I mean, he does argue for it
Yeah,
extensively
that's
in his
kind of what I'm
text.
objecting to.
Yeah, but that's the whole point. That's not the discussion that we were initially having. And the people objecting to it, they weren't making the criticism based on some B theoretic framework as an assumption. That was had nothing to do with it. So we're
I
trying to
don't know about
address the
that.
other consideration first about under A theory, does anything begin to exist? That's
Well,
that's what was being
can I
addressed.
well, I think that's where we're at. I think things can begin to exist under the A theory, but I don't think that if somebody presumes a B theory, that's going to make it
Okay, but I
exist.
don't think
I
that the
don't know
other
how
But
people
Noel
Leo,
views
I don't
time,
think
Leo,
but
the
we'd have
other
to ask
people
him.
Leo.
objecting were assuming that, Leo. That's the point.
Yeah,
I
Well,
Leo.
that's
think that
fine. I
Let
they
me let
never
were
me try
said that
to.
anybody assumed that. I don't know
yeah,
why you guys are
they
saying
were
that I said things I never said.
I never did said that, but I'm explaining to you why moving on to the B theory and arguing about that is not really helpful when there are people who were claiming that things don't begin to exist with the
Well,
assumption
I
of the
wasn't the
A
one that
theory.
really like stimulated that. People asked me questions when I merely mentioned it, and then
Yeah,
the
yeah, but
discussion moved in
you
that direction.
interacted with it,
So,
Leo. Let me
yeah,
explain
yeah,
something
but
to
I'm
you.
not the one that brought it up, am I? Or
Yeah, yeah, no,
initiated
no,
a
but
can I
discussion on it, rather.
can I
let me
make a
just explain.
distinction?
Let me just explain this point. So right now, when the person brought up the whole coffee example, right? He made a cup of coffee. It wasn't when he said that it began to exist. Your response wasn't, "Hey, nothing begins to exist," you know. And then
No, that wasn't my
you didn't
response.
you
No.
didn't bring in the philosophy of time. You didn't bring in
Actually, I
B theoretic
did,
considerations. What you were
because
talking
that
about,
would
as
be
I heard,
relevant to my explanation. I did bring
but
that, and I said it's going to depend on, and that's when I said this is where philosophy of time becomes relevant. Whether or not something begins to exist is really going to depend on how you view time. That's exactly what I said, and then that's where the discussion moved into to talking about time, because it's very much relevant to what we're discussing.
that's fine. That's fine. So if you said that, then that's okay. But then what I heard from like the past 10 minutes or so was you actually affirming the idea that all we see is a recombination of prior matter into new forms, and nothing
Yes.
really begins to exist in that sense. So that's the main part I heard. And when I asked my question, that's when I heard the whole theories of time consideration coming into the picture, and what emergence or beginning really is in the first place. So, in that sense, I mean, I'd see that as a concern, because given the way the conversation was going, I think the example I gave would help maybe shed some light on what it could mean for something to begin to exist, at least on like just a commonsensical view of time, to like an A
So
theory.
Ride or die. I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint. Ride or die.